I'm just guessing, but I bet the amens were far and few between for Jesus that day. What we have heard from that sermon is indeed a hard teaching, one that goes against some of our most innate desires for self-preservation, fairness, and justice. One might ask, did we hear Jesus correctly? Did he really say, love your enemies? Do good to the ones who hate you? When someone steals from you, don't even think about asking for it back. Let the one who hit you once take a second swing, and so on. Not only is this a challenging message, it seems like an awfully odd way for one to build a kingdom. Imagine this slogan: join a movement where you can have empty pockets and 2 black eyes. And yet, as strange as it sounds, there is something here that gets to the heart of who God is, who we are called to be, and the ways that we are called to live in this world. The passage that Jane so nicely shared with us today comes from Jesus' Sermon on the Plain. You might be more familiar with the Sermon on the Mount, which takes up all of chapters 5 through 7 of Matthew's Gospel. But here in Luke 6, Jesus' sermon is condensed, no longer on a mountain, but on a flat place, where Jesus is surrounded by apostles, disciples, and common folks around them. Like the longer sermon in Matthew's Gospel, this one also has Beatitudes. Blessed are those. It has our instructions on relating to enemies. There's a command not to judge, recognition that good fruit is the fruit of good trees, and a call to build one's life on the firm foundation. But Luke's gospel not only is condensed, or this sermon is condensed, but Luke also takes a gentler tone than Matthew in the Sermon on the Mount. There is this high demand for righteousness. Be perfect as God is perfect. But Luke is a bit gentler, more focused on the mercy of God. In both sermons, though, the one on the plain and the one on the mount, God's kindness is given to all people, not just a select or a chosen few. God is the God who seeks the good of all. As we've heard it here today, God's kindness even extends to the ungrateful and the wicked. If we turn to the longer sermon in Matthew's Gospel, the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says that God offers what people need without any discrimination or even favoritism. It's there that God causes the rain to fall upon the righteous and the unrighteous. Rain is quite an interesting sign of God's provision. Rain replenishes vital water supplies. It makes agriculture possible. It even improves air quality, cools the environment. You could say rain is that which sustains and enriches our life. And with just the slightest bit of observation, we find that rain doesn't just fall on communities that are populated with good people, but the rain even nourishes the fields of scoundrels. God seeks the common good, not just the well-being of a chosen few. And Jesus seems to think in both the Sermon on the Mount and the Sermon on the Plain, because God seeks the good of all, the common good, we too are supposed to seek the common good. That term, common good, has been a significant concept for as long as people have been trying to figure out how to share in a public life together. At a basic and most general level, the common good is distinct from those things that we would call private goods, those things that are only for some. The common good is an intention for everyone to be respected, to have the means to find well-being, and to live in a kind of peace. Aristotle said the common good is the aim of society where all citizens are able to flourish and to develop their potential through virtuous activity. For that to happen, Aristotle believed that people need a sense of order, not overwhelmed with chaos, and security and opportunities. To put it in a little bit more of a churchy kind of context, Pope John the 23rd said the common good is the sum total of social conditions which allow people, either as groups or individuals, to reach their fulfillment more fully and more easily. This call to pursue the common good is important for how people get along in this world. But I would say today it's especially important for those of us who want to take this hard teaching of Jesus seriously. And it's especially important for those of us who want to take Jesus seriously, but also don't have the kinds of enemies who are trying to steal our shirt or trying to hit us twice and all those sorts of things listed in that litany. To seek the common good is the way that we can do exactly what Jesus called us to do, to love expansively and without discrimination. In fact, it's the very thing that is supposed to distinguish us from others, is that we love expansively, not just our own. Like God, Jesus says, we are to seek the well-being of all people, even, or especially, the well-being of those who don't care about our well-being. That's the ethic of Jesus. That's the way of God's kingdom. Today on the church's calendar, I got dressed appropriately mid-service. It's the last Sunday of the Christian year, and on this day we proclaim Christ is our King. Now, that hasn't always been emphasized. It was only since 1925 when Pope Pius XI declared a feast day to recognize Christ the King. He did so strategically, noting that the church was in a time in the mid-1920s. There was a rise in secularism and there was a rise in nationalism across the world. He wanted to remind the church that the way of Jesus was above the ways of the world's powers and rulers. And he declared that as a feast day, but it's only been since 1970 that this last Sunday on the church year has been designated for observation of Christ the King Sunday. Ever since 1970, our last word before we begin anew next week in Advent has been to proclaim that God's ways are superior to all earthly powers. That sounds good, and yet one still has to ask, does king language seem useful here? After all, America took shape in its current form in resistance to a king. And last month, October, Bruce, not August, last month, millions of people hit the streets to say, we still don't want a king. Maybe that language of kingship has lost its meaning, or it's not the right idiom for our time, but nonetheless, it is wise for us to remember that Jesus showed up with a message that was not apolitical. In fact, he showed up proclaiming the rule of God, the way of God that supersedes all empires and all powers of this world is here present among you. But where we can't get lost is to recognize that that kingdom, the way of Jesus, was so profoundly different from what passes as empire in his time and in ours. That we need to remember that any allegiance to his ways is going to take some getting used to. Getting used to that. It's being part of a kingdom that is serious about the common good, not just our particular good. Surprisingly, this is still a contested debate. Earlier this year, you may have heard about this, but the vice president, who was a Catholic, J.D. Vance, laid out an Ordo Amoris, the order of love. He was laying out some justifications and to instruct how he thought people should live. He said our first obligation is to love our family, and then to love our community, and then to love our country. And only then, once all of those obligations are fulfilled, we can direct our love to those beyond our own. Now, Pope Francis, who has since died, but who was the Pope at that time, responded to this ordering of love in a letter that he wrote to U.S. Catholic bishops. He presented a different ordering of love. In fact, he said the order falls apart. God's children are called to exhibit universal love and care, not just to our own, as if there were these concentric circles that move outward, but to love, and especially to love those who are most vulnerable. That sounds like Pope Francis, doesn't it? To be honest, one of those sounds like the limited love that Jesus notes in the sermon, that even the sinners do this. And one of those sounds more like the love that Jesus calls us to. May we love like the God who loves all without limit. Now, I know there are some among our congregation who regularly ask the question, has St. Paul's become too political? I imagine that little comment about J.D. Vance and the Pope will stir up some new conversations if those have settled. But I want to suggest to you that that's not the right question. May I propose a better question for us, or at least what I humbly would suggest is a better question for us. In what arenas of life must we go and speak if we intend to love like the God who desires the good of all, not just some? I think that's a good question for us. And I can put it a little bit more plainly than I did there too. How are we going to pursue the common good if we don't get involved in the conversations where people are debating the common good? Don't we have to be involved there? on this last Sunday of the church year, the last word before we start over again, we're left with a challenging word, a challenging teaching, and also a world of possibility. Even the promise of rewards. But as we've heard, the reward for those who live in God's kingdom is not necessarily pockets full of cash or even faces that will remain unbruised. But the possibility is being called beloved children, the children of God. Thanks be to God. Amen.